Welcome back to my YouTube channel, guys. Today we are going to talk about holidays and vacations. In fact, we're going to talk about annual leave, public holidays, paid time off in New Zealand compared to the US. They are very different, so I think you're going to like this video. I'm going to share my own experience on what it's like living in New Zealand and in the US and taking holiday. So if you didn't see my last video, I'll put it here. I showed you what we did on our summer holiday here in New Zealand, so check that out. If you also haven't heard, is I have a new store with Kiwi American merchandise. If you want to check that out, that link is below. All right, let's talk about holiday and vacations in New Zealand compared to the US and how are they different. I think you're going to really like this video because they are quite different. A lot of you really liked my healthcare video. I'll put it here if you haven't seen it, talking about the differences in healthcare between the US and New Zealand. But today we're going to talk about paid time off, annual leave, public holidays. How are they different in New Zealand compared to the US? And then I will tell you some personal stories and my experiences in both. So let's get started. Okay, first let's talk about public holidays. You'll find in the US and New Zealand, they're roughly the same. They're between 9 and 11 days off per year. But what you will find interesting, and this is something I actually learned today that I did not know that this was true, but all of the holiday that I'm going to talk about today is nationally mandated in New Zealand that everybody gets this. Whereas in the US, none of it is nationally mandated. In fact, even though there's 10 public holidays in the US, your company, your business, your school, whatever, does not have to give it to you. And I'm sure that this is probably because of retail and they need some people to work retail, and there's different industries like hospitals and things that, so it's not mandated by the government, but yeah, you could literally work in the US and not get any public holidays off. In New Zealand, that's not the case. If you're an employer, you are required to give your employees those public holidays off. Okay, so then if we move on and we talk about your annual leave, your paid time off, and the differences between the countries. So let's start with the US. Now in the US, I looked up, I did some research just to kind of like, is my experience exactly what is actually true? So let me clarify another thing that was interesting to me in my research is that the companies in the US are not required to give you any annual leave. Not required to give you any annual leave. So yeah. So if there are people in your lives that you know as Americans that don't have annual leave, the government does not require that people have days off. So I think that there are probably a lot of people that we don't even realize that don't have any time off. So of course, that's not the majority of companies. And anytime I've worked in the business world, in education, I've always had annual leave. But it's considered a benefit as something that the company is giving you, but they don't have to, okay? I've never had an experience where people have had it taken away, but maybe that's the case sometimes. But anyway, that's interesting. I didn't know that you didn't have to give them any. So that's fascinating. And I think that that's because they want to give people flexibility and companies to be flexible on in different industries and different situations, whether someone's a casual worker or part-time, and not regulating it too much. But yeah, you could literally work in the US and not have any annual leave. So, you know, if nothing else, I think that speaks to why the US is so innovative. They get a lot of things done, and they get it done fast because they're always working. So there's that benefit of it as well. Typically in a company in the US, you will get 2 weeks, so 10 days annual leave after you've worked there for a year. So your first year, you generally don't get any. And this has always been my case anytime I've worked. And if you check out Wikipedia, and it'll tell you, you know, this is generally the case in the US. So 10 days after you've been there for a year. Then In 5 years, generally people can earn 15 days. In 10 years, you can earn 17 days. And in 20 years of service at an organization, now this isn't like you've just been a working person for 20 years. It's working at the same organization. You get 20 days. So that would be 4 weeks of holiday. So you have to literally work at the same company for 20 years in order to get 4 weeks holiday. That's very interesting. And that just shows the value system of the US. All of this is just really showing that they really value efficiency, getting things done. They're not that concerned about letting people have some rest, getting time off. People can manage themselves, kind of thing. And so that is definitely the feeling when I work there. But you know, when you grow up there and that's all you don't really know any different. And you just kind of think that everybody is like that. Okay, another thing about working in the US is that even though you get these holidays, it's not really valued that you take it. So like, even though you may have earned it, maybe you've been there for 20 years and you have earned the 4 weeks, you're not really encouraged to take it. And you certainly wouldn't be encouraged to take it all at once, right? So generally people will take a week-long vacation. Anything over that seems really long. And so that's a very interesting thing when moving to New Zealand and how very different that is. Okay, in summary, in the US, the companies that you work for are not required to give you any public holidays off or any annual leave. So that's true. In fact, if you go, okay, and I would show you this, but I'm not set up for that right now, but if you go on the Wikipedia site and you type in annual leave by country, you'll get pages and pages of every country, right? That's around the world. And it goes through annual leave and it's a public holiday and then total. And if you look at that and you scroll down to the US, so I'm going through all these countries, and United States near the end, right? It's 0, 0, 0. Is there any other country that has 0, 0, 0 as the, guaranteed time off? No, not one other country. Everybody around the world values paid time off for their employers. Now, there were a lot of variation, and I would say some of like the bigger countries like China and Russia, they don't give a lot of time off either, but they do give time off and it's required. And so that's so fascinating to me. I never realized that in the US it is not actually required. So it's really eye-opening if you're just scrolling through pages and pages of time off and the US is 0, 0, 0. Okay, now moving on to New Zealand and their vacation time, their holiday time, their annual leave, their sick days. So we kind of talked about the public holidays, so we know that they're generally the same as the US. But let's talk about annual leave. In New Zealand, no matter whether you are a part-time employee, a full-time employee, a casual employee, a fixed-term employee, any type of employee automatically gets 4 weeks holiday. Automatically. Government mandated. Companies don't have a choice. Everybody gets 4-week holiday. So in the US, it takes you 20 years at one company, which is totally unrealistic these days. Nobody ever works at one company anymore. 20 years at one company to get 4 weeks holiday. If you move to New Zealand and you work, whether you work at the cafe part-time, you're a casual substitute teacher at a school, a relief teacher if you're in New Zealand, you get 4 weeks annual leave. Now you have to build those up on your first year. When you come, like you can't start on day one and get 4 weeks, obviously, but you accrue it right through the year. And so, yeah, that's amazing. I remember when I came here, I was like, what? And you get government mandated 5 sick days. And then there's government mandated bereavement days and all different ones. And I'm not going to go into all of that, but you get 5 sick days as well. I didn't even touch on sick days in the US because it's 0. Let's guess. Okay. And so, yeah, That is crazy. And then like, and they add every year of service for sick days. So like for me, I've been 3 years somewhere. I have a lot of sick days, like a lot. And they just kind of add up, and you can use them like if you get injured or somebody in your family gets injured and you need to take care of them, and you're, allowed. And it's all, the rules vary a little bit by company and organization, but also the government mandates that as well. So I have to tell you that personally, it's just a whole nother way of living when you can have 4 weeks off in a year. In fact, as an American, it was difficult. It was difficult to come into a country and just feel okay, I guess, about taking holiday. And let me just say something about that. So for example, when I started working and I was there and somebody went and they're like, oh, I'm gonna go back to India or wherever they're from for a month or 6 weeks. And I remember having lunch with this person and thinking, oh my gosh, like my immediate thought as an American is, oh my gosh, you're gonna get fired. Oh my gosh, you're not gonna have a job for you when you get back. Because that's how it is in the US. Like if you leave, you could be replaced. And that would be considered normal. And so people don't really get fired. It's not easy to get fired in New Zealand. I don't know all of the HR rules around that, but in the US, it is. You can get fired. It can just be like, boom, you're out, because there's no rules around it. There's no regulation nationally around that. So people have fears around losing their job. And so they do what it takes. They show up to work. Right? So as an American working in New Zealand, it felt really weird to be able to take so much time off. And not only be able to take, in fact, encouraged to take. Your boss here, my experience, my family's experience working here is they want you to take your holiday. Whereas in the US, you don't have that. Living and working in New Zealand and having 4 weeks off, and you're encouraged to take it all at once. So like for me to like have a month off is kind of like, as an American, like the thing you do once in your lifetime. Whereas in New Zealand, it's every year for them. And oftentimes more than that. So if you're going to say Europe or somewhere far away, they would say, oh, you need 2 months off, and you can get like unpaid time off, but it would be okay. You could take a sabbatical, I think, for like, depending on your job. Now, this isn't true for every type of industry in New Zealand, but you could take a sabbatical for 6 weeks and you would still have your job. And so that was the biggest mental shift for me when I was working here, is I would see people going away for 6-week holidays, and I'm worried that they're going to come back and they're not going to have a job, right? Because it would be given to somebody else. And that's just not the case here. There's not as many people in New Zealand, and so people don't just like, they don't do that. That's just not a value of society. But it's also, there's not a lot of people anyway for positions. Whereas in the US, like you can just kind of go through employees very easily and quickly because there's a lot of people. So that was very interesting for me. Also, when I take holiday in New Zealand, my boss not only encourages it, but here's the other thing that's different is, even though you're on holiday in the US, you are still expected to keep up on work. If there's an emergency, they're calling you. If there's something that they need that you have that you know easily, they're calling you. Okay? Whereas in New Zealand, they don't want you to do work. They even tell you to not check your email, not log into the computer. You need to take a full break. And I can honestly say that I've gotten scolded multiple times here because of the mental adjustment it is. So for an American, it feels like to give 100%, to do the job the best you can. You're always available 24 hours a day, whether you're on holiday or not. And so that when you live by that definition, it is hard to adjust to that. And so then to think that I'm going to take a whole month off and everything's gonna, I trust that it'll run okay, but like sometimes, you just feel like things could be handled better if you did it. And so you don't really hesitate to do that because that would be the expectation in the US. And so that's definitely been an adjustment. Now, just so you all know, I've fully adjusted and I have no problem taking multiple weeks off at a time. And in fact, when I talk to friends and they're like, boy, are you still on vacation? Or that I hear comments like, are you going to have a job when you get back? Because people get concerned because that's just how it is in the US. So this may be a little bit eye-opening if you haven't realized really the difference. And it was for me as well. And in general, the value system in New Zealand is that they generally really care for its people, as you can see with how it handled the COVID situation. A story to kind of end this for you is I started a new job and my boss says, okay, so tomorrow you're going to meet with health and safety. And I thought, what? I had a desk job. I worked on a computer and I thought, health and safety. In the US, I used to own a construction company and you just kind of think health and safety in terms of like a construction company or people that are doing dangerous jobs, and that there's different rules and regulating bodies in the US that protect people that are doing dangerous jobs. And so I was like, why? And it's not called health and safety, but it's similar. And I'm like, health and safety? Like, why would somebody need to meet with me about health and safety at a desk job? I'm like, all right. So I didn't want to sound like I don't understand what's happening. So I just said, okay. And then they showed up the next day and it was like something I have never experienced before. They came over, it was an HR rep from the organization, and she comes in and she goes, okay, well, how do you like your desk? And I was like, it's fine. Like, is she really asking me how my desk is? Like, would you like a standing desk? Would that be better for you? And I was like, how do you like your chair? I mean, she said, how do you like your keyboard, your mouse pad? And I was like, what? It was almost like surreal. Like I was trying not to, I was laughing inside. And I'm like, well, I would like a more ergonomic mouse pad, please, and keyboard. And she's like, that's no problem. How's your chair? And she sat in the chair and she's like, oh, this isn't a great chair. I'm like, sure, I'll take a nicer chair. Like, what? And she's like, and so we want you here. This is what she said to me. This is a true story. We want you here to take breaks since you are at an office type job where you're sitting at a computer all day. We want you to get up, walk around every hour, make sure that you take your lunch break and you take breaks and you step away from the computer. And she's giving me this whole thing about health and safety in working at a desk job. And so, yeah, that was eye-opening for me. And I could not wait to tell my friends in the US, like, what happened and what someone was saying. They're encouraging you to like exercise because they had programs with exercise organizations around. They're like, take a break, go work out. And I'm sitting there, you're telling me during work to take a break. And that is just so different than it is in the US, because typically in the US, like you are contracted to work, say 40 hours a week, but it's not uncommon that people are working 50, 60, 80 hours a week. Even though they're only contracted to do 40, because work is what's valued. So you'll also notice with Americans that if you go there and you're visiting them and they say, oh, sorry, I have to work, to a New Zealander that might come across as a bit rude, that you wouldn't even take time off, but that American may not have time off. They don't want to take time off to look bad in front of their boss, and it's just kind of a different value system. Americans, if you say to them, I can't come because I have to work, nobody questions that. That makes sense. You got to do what you got to do. That's valued. The work is valued, not hanging out with somebody else. But anyway, that's just been my experience. I'm sure this isn't everybody's experience in the US and in New Zealand, but I would like to hear your experiences. So please comment below, share your thoughts, and let me know what your experiences are living in the US or New Zealand and your work experiences, because I'd really like to hear more stories, because I'm only limited to my experience. But if you enjoy this channel, I generally talk about differences between New Zealand and the US, and then some fun things. I do some baking. I sometimes Zoom with a friend in the US and we kind of share differences. So check out my channel below, subscribe if you like it, and I'll see you next week.